Welcome everyone. We are back. This is week 5 of the Multiclass League here at Apex One. We are live from Losail here for week 5 of the Multiclass League. So just showing a quick drone view for you guys. As you can see, we're here racing in the night. We have the lights here at Losail and should be an interesting race. We have 11 drivers on the grid for this race, as you can see. Very big track, lots of runoff for all drivers, but be taking a look here at the pit lane. We had a late start to the broadcast, unfortunately. We're right now at the tail end of the qualifying session, and it looks like Vic has actually taken pole position for his first time of the season. We have Vic in pole with a 2-minute flat, and looks like we are just about approaching the end of overtime now. So there we see Steven currently out on track, getting in his final lap of the qualifying session, but all drivers were just placed in a 15-minute qualifying session. They had 15 minutes to set their fastest possible lap, and that determines where they will start for the 45-minute race that will be starting in about 5 to 6 minutes from now. But just to move down the rest of the grid, see where the rest of the drivers finish. As you see, Steven crossed the line. Steven currently sits in second place in the GT4 class, just about, so 1.6 seconds to Brian. So a pretty sizable gap between the two drivers. Looks like Brian has a pretty commanding lead in pole position in the GT4 class. But moving back on to the GT3 class, looks like besides Vic, David will be taking the front row with a 2:05. David is in the Porsche 911. David got second place in qualifying, and behind David will be Matt, who is in third place in the Lexus. Just gonna pull up my timing board for you guys. Matt qualified in third in the Lexus RCF with a 2:79. So Matt was just under 2/10 behind David in the battle for second for the starting grid. But other than that, looks like Peter qualified in fourth in the Lamborghini Huracan, followed by Shane in sixth in the Acura, and then Keith will be starting the race in sixth place in the GT3 class in the McLaren 720S. Moving on to the GT4 class, I already mentioned Brian got pole position with a 2:11.5. Steven claims second place with a 2:13.1, and then TJ takes up the third spot with a 2:14.3. Moving further back down the grid, in 10th place, in third place for the GT4 class, will be Cole in the BMW M4 GT4, rocking the Jimmy Broadbent, the nice, see if we could go over to his camera actually for you guys. Let's see, Cole. So you see Cole rocking, I believe that's the Falcon livery, the Bilstein Falcon livery. Ran the 24 hours of Nürburgring with driver Jimmy Broadbent. Misha also drove that as well as one other car YouTuber who I cannot think of the name right now. But besides Cole, taking up the last place position on the grid will be Phil. Phil is actually driving a new car this week. Phil decided to make the switch from the Ford Mustang to the Mercedes AMG GT4 Evo. So Phil keeping it pretty similar, deciding to stick with the front engine car switching from the Mustang to Mercedes, both cars do have that front engine. Both cars also do have that V8 engine, although the Mercedes introduces some turbo in there. But other than that, pretty similar cars. I think the Mercedes weighs a bit less. But besides that, that is the end of the qualifying. There you see the timing board on the top right for you guys. But we have 1 minute left in the end of the qualifying session. And then we will have a short 4-minute break before we get started for week 5 of this race. But in the meantime, I just want to give you guys a quick rundown of our standings for both GT3 and GT4 classes. So although we only have 11 drivers on the grid for tonight's race, we do have 19 drivers, 19 drivers total in the league. We have 11 drivers in the GT3 class, as well as 8 drivers driving in the GT4 class. But in the GT3 class, Hugo is currently the leader of the league after 4 weeks, and the leader by a long shot. Hugo has 102 points, and sitting in second place is Peter with 58 points. So I don't know the confirmation on the math, but I think we could say with certainty that Hugo has this league in the bag if he hasn't already completely clinched it. But both of those drivers in the top 2 are driving the Lamborghini Huracan, so that looks to be the car of the season so far, although we do have 2 weeks remaining. But further down in the standings, Keith is currently in 3rd with 44 points, followed by Chris, who's in 4th with 42 points. So only 2 points separates the 2 drivers, although Chris is missing this week, so we'll definitely see Keith bringing up his gap over Chris in the standings. But behind Chris is Matt in 5th with 36 points. I think this drop from Chris will also see Matt moving further up, possibly into that 4th place position. But the remainder of the GT3 class, we have Shane in 6th in the Acura, followed by John in 7th. Vic is in 8th in the Mustang, although he starts the race in pole position. Followed by him is David in 9th, Doug in 10th in the Ferrari 296, and then Jamie in 11th. Although Jamie unfortunately just announced that he did have to drop out of this league. Jamie unfortunately sustained a hand injury. Sorry about that. Was just making sure all drivers were good. One of the drivers just needed his crew chief on. So that's one of the new additions here at Apex. All drivers now have a virtual assistant in their ear. They can now hear when they're driving. They can now hear when there's drivers around them. They also get updates on fuel usage, other drivers, how they're driving in comparison to them, so on and so forth. But just going back to the league standings, just concluded with the GT3 class. The current leader of the GT4 class is Seamus with 97 points. Seamus is also using this week as a drop week. He's currently on vacation in France, so safe travels to him. He'll be looking to get back for week 6 and hopefully defend that first place position and get his first ever league win. But other than that, we are about to get this race started. And that is lights out and away we go, ladies and gentlemen. So here we go, start of the race. Have our lovely new drone cam showing off what's going on with all the drivers. Looks like a clean start so far. So you see Vic is holding his lead at the moment. Look here. Here you see Shane making a move on the inside, able to defend it. Now taking a look further up the grid with David. All right, see if he still has it.
Your mic is on.
They just had Cole's little assistant requesting a review. I think Cole sustained a penalty. Don't know why, but Cole picked up a penalty. Wanted to see if he could have that cleared. But for now, we're taking a look back at our GT3 class. So as of right now, Vic remains in the lead. Matt is about 1 second behind. So commanding lead so far from Vic. We're going to take a look here on board with Peter for a bit. There you see Peter start. About 3/10 separates the drivers. Peters looks to be knocking on the door of Keith, but as of right now, Keith is going to hold off. There you see our broadcast cam now switching to the trackside view from all drivers. Keith continues to defend his position, although Peter's going to attempt a quick move on the outside, but is just going to flirt with it for about a tenth of a second as he makes his way back behind Keith and then gets tapped by Shane. Shane is in the Acura. There you see a little spin from Shane as well. Shane looks to be getting more aggressive as you see Peter's attempting to make an overtake. Peter's going to hit the brakes early, but Keith is going to go slightly wide. That's going to make room for Shane to try to get past. So Keith went a little wide. Peter had to slam the brakes to avoid any collisions. And Shane almost went barreling by. But all that is going to make room for David. David was in 6th place, but David was able to make his way straight past Shane, leading up into the last turn of the track. Although Shane seems to have the better run down the straightaway. Shane is going to look to make a move on the inside, down over David. There we saw in the bottom left, Peter also making his move over Keith at the same exact time. Both drivers getting their overtakes complete on that first turn of the track. Very clean move from both drivers, taking advantage of that long straightaway. At the moment, Peter sits in third ahead of Keith. And Shane was ahead of David for a moment, although Shane goes wide by a bit, and David seemed to hit that turn with perfection and darts right ahead of Shane and is now a few tenths ahead of Shane. David now is back into fifth. Keith is now into fourth. Peter has made his way up into third, and at the moment, Vic has a commanding lead in first. The gap is currently 3.5 seconds and is only growing. We're about 5 minutes into the race now. But Vic looks to be the dominant driver in the GT4 class at the moment. I think that Mustang is showing its straight line speed here on this track, which definitely does favor the faster, more straight line cars. But I'm gonna move down into the GT4 class for a bit. It looks like Steven is the current leader in the GT4 class. Steven had a very strong performance last week at Laguna Seca. Steven got his first podium of the season, and I think of his league career. Steven got third place at Laguna Seca. That was able to move him up to third in the standings. Right now, Steven is in third with 53 points. Brian is in second with 78. Brian has a pretty comfortable lead in second place in the overall standings, but there's 2 weeks left. Steven still does have time to fight back. At the moment, Steven is looking at 25 points for the win. Brian is in second place, so Brian would be getting 18 points at the moment if he's able to hold on to second, but anything can happen. At the moment, Steven's just going to be hoping for a big spin or crash from Brian, and I think if Steven is able to get a win in week 6, he could possibly overtake Brian in second in the overall league standings. But at the moment, Steven's eyes are on Losail and Losail only as he looks to get his first win of the season and of his whole league career there in the McLaren 570S. So here we see Brian and Steven battling it out. This is the battle for first in the GT4 class. Brian is right on the rear bumper of Steven, quickly approaching him. Gonna take a look over at our lap timings. Looks like Brian's last lap was a 2:12.9. Steven's was a 2:13 flat. So very close in terms of lap times between both drivers. But at the moment, Steven remains ahead. So we're back on board with Brian. Just had to step away for a second. Unfortunately, Cole got disqualified. Cole jumped the start of the race, had a message that he had a penalty. I was attempting to clear it for him, but he had the warning that he had one lap to serve it, and he didn't serve the penalty and was unfortunately disqualified as a result of his jumping of the race start. So an unfortunate end to the night for Cole. He is going to at least secure points for making it for this week, and he will be finishing above all the other drivers who weren't able to make it for this week. But other than that, I'm going to jump back up to the GT3 class for a second as Steven continues to hold his 1 second gap over Brian for the lead. But we're now taking a look on board with Peter. Peter is in the beautiful black and red plaid Lamborghini Huracan. Peter currently sitting in third, just 9/10 behind Matt in the Vassar Sullivan Lexus. This is the battle for second place. 30 minutes left. 15 minutes have already been raced so far. I believe we should be seeing pit stops soon from the drivers. So all drivers aren't required to make a pit stop, but there is double tire wear and double fuel wear, meaning all the GT3 cars and most GT4 cars will be needing to make a pit stop at around that halfway point in the race to top up on fuel. I know some drivers may be taking a fresh set of tires as well. So definitely some strategy at play. I know some drivers have decided to start on an almost full tank, while other drivers have decided to go with a less full tank of gas, deciding to make their pit stop sooner, hopefully undercut the rest of the grid. But we're gonna take a look back at the battle for the lead in the GT4 class. There you see a little bit of scuff marks on the side passenger door from Brian in the beautiful Advan GR Supra, but Brian continues to hound Steven. He's currently decreased the gap to just 0.8 of a second and is now making his way down the straight. He's going to look to get into the slipstream of Steven. I think he's just out of the slipstream zone. There's no defined point of when you're in the slipstream of another driver, but I would say in the GT4 cars that have a little less aero, I would say you definitely need to be less than half a second away from the drivers in order to get a benefit of the slipstream. And for those of you that don't know what slipstream is, it's basically a wind aero effect that occurs when you drive closely behind the car of someone else. If they're driving at speed in front of you and you're able to follow them, you're driving in what's called clean air. This air is essentially thinner air. The air has already been pulled from the car that's driving in front, meaning, in simple words but very dumbed down words, it's easier for your car to cut through the air because the air isn't turbulent. So that gives you a slight advantage going down the straights, especially if you're very close to a driver. May give you that extra 1/10 of a second that you need to lunge and attempt to overtake. The overtake that Peter is currently looking for at the moment, as well as Brian in the Super GT4. But Peter's going to go on the outside. Matt is going to continue to defend his spot and hold that inside line, and he's going to do it successfully. There you see Phil at the bottom of the screen in the GT4 car. The two of them are going to be soon approaching lap traffic from the GT4 class. That should definitely throw a twist in the mix for both drivers. Although Phil's going to keep it very responsible, cleanly gets out of the way of both drivers, is able to slow down, go well on the outside of the track. That's definitely the kind of race etiquette you'd like to see from all drivers here, making sure they keep it clean and keep it responsible. All drivers are driving together here in person at our sim racing facility in Westfield, New Jersey. It is Apex One, New Jersey. We have 20 motion sims up and running. Right now, this is the Wednesday League. We do this every Wednesday night for 6 weeks. We are currently in week 5 of 6. But Wednesday League is multi-class GT3 GT4. Monday League is Classic GT, which are early 2000s GT1 cars such as Murcielago. You have your Vipers, Salines, and more. So definitely an interesting league. Both leagues very interesting. But there you see Matt deciding to make his pit stop early, and Matt is going to slightly overshoot his pit box. There you see Matt having to reverse just a little bit. I don't know if there's a planned pit stop or not from Matt, but he is in the pits now. He's going to at least be getting fuel and possibly tires as well. See the two of them going side by side for a moment. Steven's gonna remain out on top. Brian slams on the brakes, just barely avoiding an incident with Steven. And there you see Brian swerving down the small straight. Brian is struggling behind Steven. Steven seems to be holding him back. Although I don't know if I could say that with confidence because Brian is not able to cleanly get past him. Brian's gonna attempt to make a move on the inside. The two of them are going to butt fenders there as they make their way past the last turn and down onto the main straightaway. Steven remains out on head. Brian is just 4/10 behind. Heard some frustration over there in the corner of Brian's sim. Brian is currently racing on our highly coveted Ultimate simulators. But I heard some frustration from Brian there as he was trying to make his way around Steven. And there you see him taking a very wide turn in comparison to Steven. There you see Brian going to make a move on the inside, and Steven jabs right into him. I don't know if Steven was able to see him or not, but Brian was clearly on the inside of Steven, not only well on the inside of him, but also ahead of him. And then Steven just very aggressively, almost out of nowhere, turned right in on Brian, slammed in to the front fender and side door of Brian. Luckily, none of them spun. Brian was able to come out on top. And Brian is currently leading the GT4 class once again this season. That has very much been the theme of this season so far, as Brian remains dominant, especially with Seamus not on the grid for tonight's race. Brian has seen himself up towards the top of all the races, being held back only by Seamus. But with Seamus missing this race, leaves the doors open for all drivers, including Steven, who is fighting back. Steven just attempted a quick move up on the inside of Brian, but was unable to do so, and falls right back behind as they once again make their way down the start-finish straightaway. Victor is going to soon be approaching the two GT4 drivers as he continues to grow his lead by a lot. Vic is now 14 seconds ahead. That lead is only growing for Vic as he makes his way first around Brian and then around Steven. But as of right now, Brian has fallen back and he's just bumped into Steven. Steven spins into the wall. That may have to be a post-race review there. That'll definitely be a post-race review, although I don't know if we'll be giving a penalty for that. But Brian bumps into Steven as he attempts to make his way past him. Steven goes into the wall, which allows Brian to get right past him. But we're taking a look at the rest of the grid. I believe that is Keith. Keith has made his pit stop. Keith is now making his way out of the pits. Shane is currently in the pit lane, as well as TJ in the McLaren. There you see Shane finally making his way out of the pit stops. Shane definitely had a longer pit stop. I think he got more fuel in comparison to some of the other GT3 drivers. But at the moment, Shane is now out of the pit lane. Steven is down the straight as Peter will make his way past him with ease. Vic has now entered the pits, which will make way for Peter to claim first at the moment. Peter still has to make his pit stop, so this isn't a true first place for Peter. Vic has now exited the pits, just 8/10 behind David. This is the battle for third, but Vic has proved dominant on this track. Gonna take a look over at our lap timings. At the moment, Vic sits with the best lap of the race with a 2-minute flat. Behind him is Peter with a 2:01. There you see Vic right on the rear bumper of David, and that's going to cause David to panic and take a very late apex and overshoot the turn, as Vic is going to very easily make his way past David and reclaim P2 at the moment. Peter is also now in the pits. There you see David entering the pits on the left side. So that's going to bring Vic back in the lead. At the moment, Peter is in the pits in second. Just saw in the top left, Peter is leaving the pits now. David currently remains in the pit lane. And Matt has just made his way past the pit lane. Also passing Peter, as Peter is slowed down by the pit lane speed limiter. That's going to make way for Matt to claim second at the moment. Matt has the second fastest lap of the race with a 2:01.8. Peter remains in third. Peter currently has a 5-second gap to Matt in second. Peter has a 3.5 second gap to Matt in the battle for P2. Now down to 3.2 seconds. 11 minutes left in the race. Matt's last lap was a 2:02.2. Peter's last lap was a 2:01.2. So Peter, at the moment, is running about a second faster per lap. 11 minutes left in the race. I think we're going to be looking at possibly 6, maybe 7 more laps from the drivers here at Losail. But still time for Peter to make up the time over Matt. At the moment, Vic's lead remains commanding. He has a 10-second lead over Matt for first. Keith is in fourth at the moment, 25 seconds behind Peter. Keith is followed by David in the Porsche in fifth. And then we have Shane in the Acura NSX in sixth. At the moment, Brian leads over Steven. The two of them were battling it out about halfway through the race, but we saw Brian have a little bit of a Bye.